He wasn't lost. That's the part he kept coming back to, later, when nobody wanted to hear it anymore. He knew that ground. He'd walked the Beckler cutoff so many times, he could tell you where the trail went soft in July and where the deadfall from the Big Burn lay across the old cut like ribs. So when he came around the shoulder of that little rise and the cabin was standing there in the trees, the first thing he felt wasn't fear. It was something nearer to embarrassment, like he'd taken a wrong turn in his own kitchen. Except he hadn't taken a wrong turn. He'd been on that exact game trail the day before. And the day before, there had been nothing there but lodgepole and huckleberry and the wet smell of the meadow starting downhill. Now there was a cabin, gray, slumped a little at one corner. Moss grown so thick up the north wall it looked like the logs were wearing a coat. A stovepipe, rusted through. A door that hung open just enough to be dark inside. It looked, he said, like it had been sitting there for 60 years. And he had been past that spot 24 hours earlier, and there had been nothing. My name is Ryan. Before we go in there with him, and we are going to go in there, I want to ask you something. Where are you listening from tonight? Drop it in the comments. I go through them, all of them, and I like knowing who's out there in the dark with me while I tell these. And if you've ever been somewhere you knew, really knew, and had that ground turn strange on you for a second, that half second where the familiar goes wrong, tell me about that too. I want to hear it. And while I've got you, apart from tonight's story, but cut from the same cloth, I put together an audiobook called What the Mountain Keeps. 10 Appalachian cases the law closed with the wrong word, across 5 states in 62 years. About 8 hours of folk horror. It's its own thing, nothing to do with the park, but if what we do here is your kind of dark, it's for you. The link's in the description and it's pinned in the top comment. Go look when we're done here. For now, come back with me to the Cascade Corner, southwest end of Yellowstone, the country almost nobody walks, the winter he stopped being able to sleep with the light off. His name was Dale, 16 years a ranger, and this is what he found. I never met Dale in his uniform days. By the time I sat across from him, he'd been out of the Park Service a good while, and he had the look of a man who'd retired earlier than he'd meant to and hadn't decided yet whether that was a relief. He talked slow. He'd stop in the middle of a thing and look out the window like the sentence had gone somewhere he had to follow it. Most of what I'm going to tell you came from him, over 2 afternoons, and the rest I dug out afterward, the incident logs I could get, the missing persons files that were public, a phone call with a lab technician who would only talk to me if I never gave a name and never said where. So when I tell you he said something, I mean he said it. And when I tell you what the file said, I checked. Start with the country, because you have to understand the country or none of the rest of it lands. The southwest corner of Yellowstone is called the Cascade Corner, and it's the emptiest part of the emptiest big park in the continental states. Most people who go to Yellowstone see the road. They see Old Faithful and the mud pots and the bison on the pavement, and they go home. Almost nobody sees the Beckler. It's cut off from the loop road. To get in there, you come up from Ashton, in Idaho, on a washboard dirt track to a little ranger station at the end of the world, and then you walk. Meadows the size of counties. Rivers you have to ford chest deep with your pack over your head. Falls River, Beckler River, waterfall after waterfall stacked up in the canyons because that corner catches all the snow off the plateau and dumps it downhill in 100 different places. It floods every spring. It's soft and marshy half the year and buried the other half. Grizzlies work it because nobody bothers them there. In 16 years, Dale figured he could count on both hands how many times he'd run into another human being past the second river crossing. And here's the piece that comes back around later, so hold on to it. A sliver of that corner isn't in Wyoming at all. The park was drawn as a rectangle before anybody worried about state lines, so a strip of it, about 50 square miles, spills over into Idaho. And there's a wrinkle in the law about that strip. A real one, people have written papers on it, that says if a crime were committed inside that Idaho piece, you might not be able to seat a jury for it at all. The Constitution wants your jury drawn from the state and the district where the crime happened, and that little strip has no residents, none, so the pool you'd need doesn't exist. Legal scholars have called it a hole in the law, a place, on paper, where certain things can't be tried. Dale knew about it the way rangers know odd facts about their own ground. He'd never had a reason to think about it much. He would. He found the cabin in late September. The high country was already turning, aspen gone gold down low, the meadows going brown, that thin, bright cold that comes in before the first real snow. He was out doing what he called a closing sweep, walking the backcountry sites one last time before winter shut them, checking fire rings, hauling out whatever people had left. He'd come in over the Pitchstone Plateau and drop down toward Beckler Meadows on a route he'd walked, like I said, a day before. He'd camped that night at a site he liked near the river, and in the morning he'd started back up the same drainage. And that's when the trees opened up and the cabin was there, He stood in the trail a long time. He told me he actually laughed, once, out loud, because the mind works like that. It tries to make a joke out of a thing it can't file. His first honest thought was that he'd somehow drifted a drainage over, so he did the thing you do. He got out his map, he got a fix on the ridgelines, he checked the river below him and the notch of the pass behind, and it all told him the same thing. He was where he thought he was. He was 200 yards from where he'd walked the morning before, and there was a cabin there that had not been there. Now, there are old buildings in Yellowstone. Poachers' cabins, patrol cabins the Park Service still keeps stocked in the backcountry, a few homesteader ruins from before the boundary got enforced. Dale knew everyone in his district by heart, because keeping them up was part of the job. This wasn't one of them. It wasn't on any map he had, and he had the good maps, the detailed ones. It sat in a spot where a cabin made no sense, low in the seep, where the ground would rot the sills out in 5 years. Whoever built it, if anybody built it wrong, in the worst possible place, and then it had stood there long enough to grow a fur of moss and rust its own stovepipe through. He walked up to it. He said the nearer he got, the wronger the smell was. Not rot, exactly, not a dead animal, something more like a place that's been shut up too long with something sweet gone off inside it, old and sugary and wrong. The door was open a hand's width. He pushed it with his boot. I'm going to tell you what he saw, and I'm going to tell it the way he told it, which was flat, no drama, a man reading a list. Because I think that's how you carry a thing like that back out of the woods. You go flat, or you don't come out at all. There were shelves, not 2 or 3. The whole far wall, floor to the low ceiling, and a second set built out from the side wall, plank shelves, rough but square, put up by somebody who cared that they were level. And on the shelves there were heads, doll heads. That's the plain word for it, and it's the wrong word, and it's the only word. They were the size of a person's head, or a little smaller, molded hard, mounted on little wooden dowels so they stood up and faced out into the room, line after line of them. He counted later, best he could, more than 40. And every one of them was a face. Not a doll face, not the same face over and over. Faces, different men, different women, each one made on its own, each one made to be someone. And each one had hair, real hair, set into the scalp of the thing, combed and parted and cut into a style. Every head a different head of hair, black, gray, one a deep red, one so blonde it was almost white, long, short, braided on one of them. Somebody had done the hair the way you'd do it for a person you were sending somewhere they'd be looked at. He stood in the doorway and he did not go in. And he told me the reason he did not go in was that the faces on the near shelf were faces he knew. He knew them from the wall of his own ranger station. Every backcountry office has one. The missing wall, the flyers, the folks who walked into the park and didn't walk out. Some of them turn up. A lot of country, a lot of ways to die in it, and search and rescue finds most of them eventually, alive or not. But some just don't come back at all, and their flyers stay up, curling at the corners, year after year, and you stop really seeing them the way you stop seeing the fire extinguisher on the wall. Dale had looked at those flyers 10,000 times, and here they were, on the shelves, made into these things. There was the fisherman who'd gone missing off the Falls River 4 summers back. Heavy set, a beard going gray, and the head had the beard, gray at the chin, exactly the way the photo did. There was the young woman who'd left the trailhead at Cave Falls one late summer morning and never checked back in. And the head had her face, and it had been made carefully, more carefully than the older ones, so careful it was almost a photograph in 3 dimensions. There was a man he was pretty sure was the solo backpacker who'd disappeared up near Union Falls the year Dale made supervisor. He recognized 6 or 7 of them right there in the first 2 lines without stepping inside. He said he could feel the rest of them looking at him, and he did not want to learn who they were. He got out. He said he backed out slow, like you back away from a bear that hasn't decided about you yet, and he pulled the door to the width he'd found it, and he marked the spot. He hung a strip of flagging tape on the tree at the trail, and he took his GPS fix right there, standing at the tree, not at the cabin. He told me that later, and he told it like a confession. He never walked the 20 steps to the wall of the thing to fix it where it stood. He couldn't. He was backing away from it the whole time, the way you back away from a bear. And the marker in his hand went on the ground his own boots were on, not on the cabin. So the figure in his field book, the one he wrote again on the inside of his forearm with a marker, with a small embarrassed shrug, because some animal part of him already didn't trust it would still mean anything by the time he got out. That figure was the trail, the tree, where he'd stood. It was never the cabin. He'd never once put a mark on the cabin itself, and he would spend years wishing he had. Then he walked. It's a 2-day walk to the trailhead from there, and he did it in a day and a half. He said he did not sleep the night in between. He sat up with his back to a boulder and his bear spray in his hand, and he did not know what he thought was coming, and nothing came. That's the first thing that happened. Now here's where it stops being a ghost story you can shrug off, because Dale did the correct thing, the professional thing, the thing that should have led somewhere. He reported it, he got to the Beckler station, and he told the seasonal ranger there, and he got on the radio. And he ran into the first soft place in the whole affair, which was that describing it out loud made it sound insane, and he knew it made it sound insane. And he could hear himself sounding insane. A cabin that isn't on the map, in a spot he'd walked the day before, full of what? Dolls? He said the word dolls over the radio and heard the pause on the other end. Everybody's polite. Everybody says they'll log it. But he could feel it landing wrong, landing in the pile where they put the reports from people who've been alone in the backcountry a week too long and start seeing things. Rangers have a name for it, that thin air unraveling, and he knew that the name was quietly being fitted to him. So he did the other correct thing. He went back with a witness. It took 11 days to organize, because you don't just stroll back into the Beckler, and by then the weather had turned and there was snow on the plateau. He went in with another ranger, a younger man he trusted, and a park law enforcement officer, 3 of them, because Dale had insisted, and because there were, after all, 40-some faces of missing people to account for if any part of it was real. They walked into his fix. They found his flagging tape on the tree, still there, snapping in the gusts, and the cabin was there. He said that relief nearly put him on the ground, because the worst thing, the thing he'd been chewing on for 11 days, was that it wouldn't be. That he'd walk up to an empty patch of huckleberry and become, permanently, the ranger who lost it in the Beckler. But it was there. The other 2 saw it. That mattered to him more than anything, that they saw it. That he wasn't alone in it anymore, except something was off, and he couldn't make it hold still enough to name. His flagging tape was on the tree where he'd left it, right at the trail. But he'd tied it to the tree, not to the cabin, and now he wished to God he'd done it different. Because standing there the second time, the cabin looked to be sitting downhill to him, farther down the drainage, down toward the meadow, down the way the water ran, toward the trailhead and the road and Idaho and out, and he couldn't prove a word of it. He'd never marked where it stood the first time. Who marks a thing like that, you don't think to? You're too busy backing away from it. So he had nothing to hold the 2 visits against, not even something to argue with himself over. He just knew it the way you know your own furniture's been moved an inch. You can't say what's wrong, but your body knows before your head catches up. And a body isn't evidence. The younger ranger, who'd never seen it before, had nothing to compare it to and thought Dale was rattled. The law enforcement officer wrote down where it was now and didn't much care where Dale thought it had been. And Dale stood there between the 2 of them, the only man who felt it and the only man in the world who couldn't swear to it. They went in. All 3 this time, all the way in. And it was exactly as he'd said. The shelves, the heads, more than 40 of them. The officer, Dale told me, was a hard man, ex-military, not a spooky guy, and the officer went very quiet, and then went outside and stood with his hand on his sidearm looking at the tree line for a while before he came back in and started doing his job. They photographed everything. They did it right. Grid, scale, the whole thing. And Dale, because he was the one who understood what he was looking at, made the call that turned out to matter. He said, "We take samples of the hair, because if these faces are our missing people, then this hair might be their hair. And if it's their hair, that's a body. That's the nearest thing to a body some of these families are ever going to get." So they took clippings. 1 lock from each head, bagged individually, labeled chain of custody, the officer signing off on every bag. 40-some little envelopes of human hair in 40-some different colors. Then they left it. You'd think they'd have torn the place apart, hauled the heads out, but you don't do that. You secure the scene and you bring in the people whose job it is. It's a federal park. That means the FBI. They flagged the location, they came out, they closed the door, and they walked the 2 days back with the hair in their packs. And Dale said all 3 of them walked fast and none of them talked. And when they hit the trailhead, the officer sat down on the tailgate of the truck and put his face in his hands for a moment and then got up and never spoke about it again in Dale's hearing as long as they both worked there. The hair went to a lab. And here's where I have to be careful, because this is the part where the story stops being something you can look up. The samples went out. Dale, being who he was, wanted to know the results, and for a while there was a channel. The officer would tell him what came back. And what came back, the first pass, was this. It was human. All of it. Human hair. Not synthetic, not animal, human. And it wasn't cut hair from a barber's floor. It had roots, follicles. It had been pulled out, which meant whatever else. It came off of people. Off of living people. Because you don't get a clean root off someone who's been dead a while. Somebody had pulled the hair out of the heads of living human beings and set it into these things 1 strand at a time. That alone should have brought the weight of the federal government down on that corner of the park. 40-some counts of something. And for a few weeks, it looked like it might. Dale said the station was tense, people came and went. There were phone calls he wasn't part of. And then came the second result. And after the second result, everything went quiet. The lab ran the DNA. That's routine. You've got hair with roots, you type it, you run it against the missing persons, you run it against the national database, you find out who these people are. And the first thing that came back was that the hair did not match the missing. None of it. Not the fisherman, not the young woman from Cave Falls, not the backpacker from Union Falls, not one of the faces Dale had recognized off his own wall. The families had given DNA for most of those cases years ago, and it didn't match any of them. The faces were their faces. Dale would go to his grave saying the faces were their faces, made careful, made right, the beard and the freckles and the gap in the front teeth. But the hair on the heads belonged to none of them. Whose was it then? 40-some colors, 40-some textures, black and gray and red and that near white blonde, straight and curled and one of them braided. You'd expect 40-some different people. That's what a lab expects. That's what makes sense. It was all one person, every strand, every color. The black hair and the red hair and the blonde and the gray. The lab ran them and ran them again because it couldn't be right, and it was right. All of it came back to a single donor, one human being, one DNA profile over and over, wearing 40 different colors of hair, which is not possible, except it was on the table in front of them, so it was possible, so they had to sit with it being possible. And that single donor was in no database. Not the criminal one, not the missing persons one, not the ones the FBI can reach into that the rest of us can't. They ran that profile against every pool they had access to, and it came back to nobody, nowhere. A person who had never been arrested, never been reported missing, never been anywhere the system had ever looked. A blank? A ghost, if you want, but a ghost with a DNA profile, which is the opposite of a ghost, which is worse. Dale is the one who understood what it meant. Not the lab, not the bureau, at least not that they told him. Dale, sitting in the ranger station one night with the report in front of him, understood it, and he told it to me plainly, and I've thought about it every day since. The hair is the maker's own. Think about it with him for a second. You've got a man, Dale always said. Man, though there's no reason it had to be, who's been doing this a long time. 13 years, if you go by the oldest faces, and probably longer than that if he was practicing before he got good, and he did get good, remember. The early heads were crude, and the late ones were almost photographs. So somebody stood in that cabin over a decade, slowly learning to sculpt a human face from memory of a missing poster photo. That's a craftsman. That's patience most people can't imagine. And a craftsman signs his work. He signs each head with a strand of himself. His own hair, pulled from his own scalp, set into each one, but not raw, not obvious. He changes it. He dyes it, cuts it, styles it to match the person the head is supposed to be, so that at a glance the hair belongs to the face. The red-haired woman has red hair. The gray-bearded fisherman has gray hair. It looks like 40 people's hair. It's his, every time. 40 colors of the same man. Why do that? Why sign it in a way only a lab could ever decode? And only if somebody thought to look, which almost nobody would. Dale worked it out, and it's the part that took the sleep from him. He can do it because he knows. He knows there's no database that can reach him. He's never been in the system, and he never will be, and he knows it. So he can afford to leave his own DNA on every single piece, right out in the open. Because the one thing that identifies a person, the thing we're all told is destiny, is the thing that catches everyone, reaches nobody in his case. He's put his name on it in the boldest way there is, and the name reaches no one. It isn't a mistake. It's the opposite of a mistake. It's a man showing you he can't be caught, in the exact place where everyone else gets caught. It's a signature. But a signature is for somebody to decipher. You don't build 40-some faces of the people you took and stand them on level shelves facing the door of a cabin you put where somebody will eventually walk past it if you don't want it found. He wanted it found. Not by everybody, by the right somebody. Somebody who'd know the faces, somebody who'd think to take the hair, somebody who'd send it to a lab and then be smart enough, when the impossible answer came back, to understand what the impossible answer was saying. It was a collection left on display, a test. He was waiting all those years for someone competent enough to decipher the message. And Dale did. Dale is the one who recognized the faces, ordered the samples, and sat alone with the report and worked out what it meant. Dale passed the test, which is the thought that got into him and wouldn't leave, that in solving it, he had answered it. He'd raised his hand. He'd told the man in the cabin, whoever that was, I'm the one you were waiting for. I'm competent enough. I got the message. Here's what happened to the case. This is the part where you have to keep your hands open and admit you don't know, because I don't, and Dale didn't, and I think that not knowing was itself part of what was done. It got closed, not solved. Closed. Sometime that winter, the whole thing went from an ongoing federal investigation with the Bureau involved to something nobody would discuss. Dale would ask and get a look. The officer who'd walked in with him got transferred to another park in the spring. A good posting, a promotion really, out of the region entirely, and Dale never got a straight answer out of him again. The younger ranger left the service the next year for reasons he wouldn't give. And Dale himself was told, in a meeting he described as very calm and very short, that the matter was being handled at a level above the park, and that he was to consider his part in it concluded, and that it would be best for everyone, including the families, if he didn't discuss it. Handled at a level above the park. That's the phrase. That's all he got. Not a name, not an agency, not a reason. A decision from somewhere up the ladder, from a room he'd never be in, from people he could never call. He said he tried, once to file a Freedom of Information request years later to get the lab report, the one he'd held in his own hands. And what came back was a letter saying no responsive files existed. No responsive files existed. He'd seen that report with his own eyes. He'd gone over it twice because he couldn't believe it the first time, and officially it had never been written. Now, I want to be honest with you about the ways this could be ordinary because I owe you that, and because Dale, to his credit, walked me through them himself. Cases get sealed. If there's an open investigation, the Bureau will absolutely tell you no files exist. That's normal. That's how they protect an active file. The reassignments could be coincidence. The lab result, even the impossible lab result, could be contamination, one technician's hair getting into 40 samples. Though the technician I spoke to swore up and down that isn't how it works, that they control for exactly that you'd never get a full clean profile 40 times from a smear. And the cabin, a building that looked 60 years old, standing on ground he'd walked bare the day before. A cabin he couldn't swear had held still between the first visit and the second. There are explanations you can reach for. Fatigue, a man mistaking one drainage for another after a hard solo week, the mind filling gaps. Dale offered me every one of those before I could offer them to him. He'd spent years offering them to himself. None of them held, he said, but he wanted me to know he'd tried them all so that I'd understand he wasn't reaching for the strange. The strange was what was left after everything else got ruled out. Because there were more times. That's the thing he told me last on the second afternoon, when it was getting dark and he'd stopped looking out the window and started looking at the table. It wasn't just the 2 times. The cabin got reported again. Not by him. At first, by others in the years after, a report here and a report there, backcountry rangers and once a pair of hikers who came out white and wouldn't be talked to. And take any one of those on its own and it's nothing. A tired ranger who mixed up his drainages after 8 days alone. Hikers who stumbled on some old homesteader ruin and spooked themselves stupid. Every single sighting has a door you can walk out of. An ordinary way it could be wrong. That's the part people miss. One at a time, not one of them proves a thing. It's only when you lay them all down next to each other that a shape comes up out of them. And the shape is this. Each one was a little farther down the mountain than the last. A little nearer the trailhead. A little nearer the road. Beckler Meadows, then nearer still, then down toward the second river crossing. Then, the last one Dale knew of before he left the service, barely a mile above the station itself, the little station at the end of the dirt road out of Ashton, where the country stops being wilderness and starts being a place you can drive to. Moving downhill if you trusted the pile. Moving out, toward people. But nobody ever sat down with a map and made it add up. Different people, different years. No 2 fixes you could really trust against each other. No line anybody could draw and call proof. The drift was only ever there in the stack. Pull any one report out and it came apart in your hand. Dale knew that better than anyone. He'd spent years trying to pull them apart himself. And the shape held anyway. And he went back one more time himself. He wouldn't tell me exactly when. Late in his career, off the books, alone, which he knew was against every rule he'd ever enforced. He went into the place the last report had put it, and he found it, and it was nearer the road than he'd ever have believed a thing could be and still be hidden. And he went inside, because he'd decided he had to, and the heads were still there. More of them now, and the new ones were faces he knew from the flyers that had gone up after his first visit. The disappearances hadn't stopped. Of course they hadn't. This was the Beckler, and people go missing in the Beckler. And now some of those people were on the shelves too, made careful, made recent, made almost photographic. And on the last shelf, the newest one, at the far end, at the top, there was a gap, an empty space on the shelf, between 2 finished heads, the right width for one more, and the dowel was already there. The little wooden peg stood up out of the plank, ready, waiting, the mount already made. At a height, Dale said, and he said this very quietly, that came to just about even with his own eyes when he stood in front of it. Not too high, not too low, the right height. For him. He left. He never went back. He put in his papers not long after. And here's the change in him. The thing that told me the rest was true, even where I couldn't check it. Dale, who had spent 16 years walking the emptiest country in America alone and loving it, who'd chosen that life precisely because he liked being the only person for 20 miles. Dale could no longer stand to be alone outdoors. Not at all. Not in his own yard after dark. He kept the porch light on. He kept a light on in every room, he admitted, all night, every night. And his wife had made her peace with it and stopped asking. He wouldn't go into forest of any kind. He'd moved to a town on the plains where you could see a long way and there were no trees to speak of, and he'd chosen it for exactly that. And he knew how it sounded, and he told me anyway. I asked him at the end, the only question that mattered, which was whether he thought the man in the cabin was still out there, still working, still moving that thing downhill toward the road, one careful season at a time. He thought about it a while, and he said the question that kept him up wasn't that one. It wasn't even the missing entry, the one donor who wasn't in any database, who'd left no trail, no job, no doctor, no birth, no line of any kind. That was strange, sure, but it was one strange thing on a pile of strange things. And he'd said it there with the rest. No, what kept him up was smaller than that, and he said it slow, watching the table the whole time. He said, I've handled a lot of bad men. 16 years you handled plenty, and every last one of them wanted something you could put a name to. Money. To get even. To hurt somebody who'd hurt them first. To be looked at. To matter. Even the ones who scared me. You could stand where they'd stood and feel the wanting come off the ground. Feel the shape of it, and the shape was human. He shook his head, slow. This one didn't want anything I could name. 13 years, more, making those faces, getting better at it the way you get better at a thing you love, and then setting them up on a shelf in the middle of nowhere and waiting. Patient, careful, like a man out watering plants before it gets hot. No anger in it, no hunger I could find, nothing I could stand next to and recognize, and I keep trying to fit that into the word man, and it will not go. So I've stopped trying to. I asked him then what the question was, the one he'd stopped trying to answer. He said, was it even human? That's most of what he'd give me. There's more I couldn't get, the where of it, the when of that last visit, the name of the lab, the name of the man in the meeting who told him it was handled above the park, doors that were shut before I ever got to them. I've gone looking since. There's a corner of the Bechler I've thought about walking myself, and every time I get near deciding, I remember the gap on the shelf and the dowel already standing there at the height of a man's eyes, and I find something else to do. If tonight got into you the way it gets into me, go find the audiobook, What the Mountain Keeps. Different cases than this one, 10 of them, all Appalachian, the law closing each with the wrong word, 5 states, 62 years, about 8 hours of the kind of dark that follows you back to the car. Link's in the description. It's pinned in the top comment. Put it on some night when you're the only one awake in the place. Some stories don't end. They just keep coming.